966.
We are thrilled to welcome onto the 966 Dr. Mehmood Khan, Chief Executive Officer of the Hevolution Foundation, the first of its kind global nonprofit organization that provides grants and early stage investments to incentivize independent research and entrepreneurship in the emerging field of healthspan science. Dr. Khan also serves as chair of the Visiting Committee on Advanced Technology at NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology. Previously served as vice chairman and chief scientific officer of global research and development at PepsiCo. Dr. Khan, it's an honor. Welcome onto the 966. Nice to speak with you.
Great to talk to you, Lucian, and truly a pleasure and an honor to participate and share a little bit of what our organization and my team does.
Well, we are really thrilled, as Lucian said, and excited to have you join us. The Hevolution Foundation is, like some things in Saudi Arabia, very ambitious, very exciting. And we can understand why someone with your background and your credentials and your expertise would be attracted to this. But before we get to the Hevolution Foundation and all that it does, can you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Sure. I've had, like any careers, nothing planned specifically, and a very, unusual career for a physician. But coming to Saudi Arabia, this is a return. I actually finished my medical school training, did my residency in internal medicine, and then spent a year in 1987 in the kingdom as the first chief resident in medicine at King Faisal Specialist Hospital. So it's interesting that 35 years later, I come back, having fulfilled a whole career between that. After my 1 year here, I continued my training in Minnesota, in endocrinology and nutrition at the university, then at the Mayo Clinic, which is where I spent 15 years, ultimately at its increasing seniority. Went from there to the pharmaceutical industry, became head of R&D, and was the president of the Global R&D Center at Takeda. From there to PepsiCo, as you mentioned, 14 years later. From there, moved on to run a biotech company that had been spun out of Harvard called Life Biosciences. And I guess there are two or three things to mention. You mentioned my work as chairman of the VCAT at NIST. I also have served as chairman of the U.S. Council for Competitiveness in Washington. And really, it's been a pleasure just both balancing the science, the technical aspects, the business, but also trying to think about it from a national policy point of view. And towards the end of that, I was asked to become a member of the commission that helped write the U.S. National Academy of Medicine's Global Roadmap on Aging. And so really it's been that evolution of treating patients with diseases related to aging, then getting involved in understanding drug development for those diseases, including diabetes, heart disease, and then from there thinking about food systems and wellness, and now trying to think about how do we slow down, if not prevent or reverse, this progression to age-related diseases. So it's been an interesting evolution of coming back full circle.
You were named in October 2020. The sort of announcements and launch for Hevolution weren't till about 2 years later, summer of 2022. Were you in on the ground floor of sort of the strategizing and what is Hevolution and what are its goals and its strategy?
Hevolution Foundation was created by Royal Order, which is the highest, it's a higher level of direction than a royal decree. And what's important about that distinction is it was signed by the king as an order. And in the last 70 years, we're only the second organization of this type created by royal order. And we're the first, which is global. And so this is not a common occurrence. It literally is about one in a century. And so that gives you the context of how important this is strategically. And of course, we have the privilege of having His Royal Highness the Crown Prince as the chairman of the foundation's board. I was engaged with the team that was chartered to take the idea of the Royal Order and actually operationalize it. And before we were an organization, it was a project within the Strategic Management Office by direction under Dr. Tunsi. I engaged with that team probably around March or so of 2020, so 6 or 7 months prior to me being appointed CEO, purely as an external advisor and an expert. Pro bono, I was approached and said, look, didn't even know what it was going to be called, but we're working on a project. It's in this space of healthy aging. I was working with the commission of the National Academy, as well as running Life Biosciences. And the idea was, what should an organization like this look like, focus on, mandate? So it was really interesting to be in that strategic sort of thinking phase, actually not even knowing at some point that I'd be approached and say, would you consider launching this as the founding CEO? So you have to be careful what you give as input, because you may actually have to inherit the advice that you give and operationalize it. So it really is a privilege to follow through. At the end of the day, I'm an operating executive, right? So it's great conceiving of things, but the reward of actually building and operating it is a whole nother level. And that's been the last 3 years.
Well, and so what exactly is geroscience? Is that the proper term?
Yes. So if you think about how we think about medicine and aging and older people, medicine has looked at in generally aging in two components, right? One is once you get a disease that's related to aging, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, dementia, what can you do? And it's an intervention essentially to patch up what's already happened, right? Can we mitigate? Can we impact the symptoms, control the blood sugars, control heart failure, etc.? And that's been traditional medicine, continues to be much of medical practice today. Then we think of geriatrics, which is really taking care of older people, often who are frail, who have difficulty managing everyday activities, and really providing them all the support, primarily in a rehabilitative way, to be able to function as much as possible. Geroscience is understanding the biology of the aging process and how it affects different systems, different organ systems, like the neurological system, the cardiovascular system, the muscle and skeletal system, and understanding how that biology manifests into the functionality that changes over time. So really that bridge is very different than basic biology, which is the biology of aging at a cellular level, geriatrics, which is the functionality, the consequences of aging, versus the biological process that translates into change in function. That's geroscience, if that makes sense.
It does. That's an excellent explanation, especially for us laymen. And if you could have included pictures, it would have been even better. But when we did a segment, when we first heard about Hevolution, it was very exciting. It's a really exciting thing. It must be just amazing to be part of. But one of the things in the segment we talked about, and this could be dead wrong, was we were impressed that, all right, here's this investment and a real commitment to the sector and the science. But there's not an attempt, it doesn't appear to be, to recreate the wheel. In other words, it seems like the Hevolution Foundation is going looking who's doing great work, what's not being funded, how can we fill the gaps, and how we can expand the field and really move it forward. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. So I like to think of this in 3 questions, really. And it's the same questions I asked myself when I took this on. The question is, why this field? Then where's the gap? And why Hevolution, right? And why now? The field, in my mind, is a no-brainer, right? If we think of global challenges that affect humanity across the world, there really are 2 that are very commonly discussed: the environment and global warming and all of the things we talk about, climate change, poverty and hunger, and how to feed 1 billion people who are hungry on the planet, go to bed every night without enough food, and what's it going to take? And those two are frequently discussed and are very important. But the third one, which is this very large, significant demographic change is occurring across the world. There's 1 billion people who are over the age of 60 today, and there's going to be 2 billion within a couple of decades. And we do not have the resources to take care of the 1 billion we have today. And imagine doubling that without the economic development that's needed to support them, the physical development, and the manpower needed to take care of another billion older people if we leave things as they are. So there's no question we have to do something, because business as usual is not possible. The US healthcare system cannot sustain itself, Medicare, by taking on and doubling the Medicare recipients. We don't have enough today. The UK NHS essentially is buckling under the pressure of an aging population. Same in Europe. China, probably even more affected given their one-child policy, Japan, Taiwan, etc. So no question that this is something that we have to take care of. In particular, we don't have enough young people, given the birth rates have, for good reason, dramatically dropping across the world, already have in many developed countries. So the pyramid of a pay-forward system, lots of young people working, take care of a few grandparents and great-grandparents, has now done this. That is, there's equal numbers. And in some countries, like China and Southeast Asia, there's one grandchild for 4 grandparents. It economically doesn't work. So no question the challenge is there. The opportunity is there. As Andrew Scott at London Business School has shown, 12 months of a compression of disease keeping people healthy is worth $4 trillion just for the US GDP. So massive economic return. So makes sense to do it. The gap, in very simple terms, is if you think about Medicare's budget, and I'll just use the example of Medicare, 60-some% of Medicare's budget is age-related diseases. Same is true in other countries. If we look at the NIH budget, 40-some billion dollars, of that, less than 10% is for the National Institute of Aging, which is the primary driver for all of these diseases. And within that, less than a quarter is directly addressing the biological processes of aging. So we have a huge mismatch between where the investment is actually being done to understand aging versus where the need is. There's this mismatch. And that's not to say we should be spending less on cancer. While we're doing how to treat cancer, maybe we need to understand the biology of why aging causes cancer and what we can do to mitigate it. So that's the gap. Why now? Because the science has progressed massively. This used to be a mindset in scientists that aging is inevitable. Every organism known to mankind just about ages. But now we're understanding that there are natural processes that drive this aging process, but they're not inevitable. And by the aging process, I'm not focused on we need to live to be 300 years old. We're saying we know you can live to be 80, 90, 100, maybe 110, 120, based on current evidence. But we're spending decades of that added life expectancy with disease. If we can age healthy, we can compress that disease. And there's very good evidence that that's possible. We just need to translate it to humans. So that's the proof point that this is worth investing. And so that's the why now, the capability scientifically just at that inflection point. And why Hevolution? Because you needed a global organization as a nonprofit, so we weren't being driven by short-term financial results. We can collaborate across borders, so we're not funded as a government entity specifically for one country's primary benefit, but truly global. And so we can fund science and technology across borders. That makes it very powerful. It's very, very rare that government-funded entities will focus globally. That's why they're the National Institutes of Health or the national this. Each of those play critical roles in funding national initiatives. Unusual to fund across countries, and we can do that. And because we're a nonprofit, we can go after things that may not be financially rewarding for investors. For example, a repurposed drug, patents expired. No private capital wants to flow there. No pharmaceutical company wants to study a drug that's only worth 5 cents a pill. It doesn't have a patent, but it may be very powerful. And so we can go after that. So it's not just going after new technologies, new molecules, but also asking questions like, is there something we already have in the cabinet that may not be financially attractive, but may be very powerful? And there's lots of evidence of that happening in medicine, in other disease states. So I've given you a long answer. I hope it gives you the spectrum of those questions.
That's extraordinarily useful. And it's really fascinating as you draw out the bigger picture. You have sort of this moment in time where where science and study and understanding has hit an inflection point, as you say, and there's this tremendous inefficiency in terms of funds addressing needs. So, and you touched a little bit about that, but you referred to yourself as somebody who operationalizes. And so you have the Hevolution concept and it's in place. And how are you operationalizing Hevolution Foundation now?
So I would think of this in 3 ways. So, as an operating executive, as a CEO, you sort of ask yourself, right, I've got clarity in what I want to get done. And you can't do everything, but where are you going to focus? Especially when you're starting an organization as it scales. There's great vision, but to break that vision into its pieces and say, all right, so our vision is very clear. Expand healthy lifespan, make people live healthier for longer, for the benefit of all. That was the direction. It's very clear in our vision statement. And why benefit for all? Because we wanted to make sure that everything we invest in can be democratized to touch as many lives as possible, regardless of where you live, how much money you have, what your religion is, you take your pick. So we wanted to make sure it had impact at scale. This isn't for a few wealthy people who want to talk about aging, and there's unfortunately a lot of publicity given around, such a billionaire is doing this so they can live longer. No. This is for touching real people everywhere in the world. That's why we say it in our vision statement. So that's the clear North Star for me as a CEO. That comes from my chairman and our board. Now, to translate that is the operationalizing and saying, okay, what are the technologies and the initiatives that can make a difference? And how do we democratize them? And the third thing I think about is every day with our team is we have the financial resources, but to really scale this, we have to create leverage. And the most powerful way of leverage is collaboration and partnerships. And so we go out there and say, who are the best partners and how do we collaborate? Not only science research, but even how we implement. So if we think about funding research, rather than reinventing the wheel and finding, a whole new team to manage our research grant management process, first thing we did was we went to the American Federation of Aging Research, largest nonprofit organization that's been funding research up to date before we entered this, and said, we want to partner with you. You help us manage our process. That means I've got to hire fewer people managing the process, and I can hire more people trying to direct this globally. Leverage it. Same with our initiatives around research funding. Partner and fund scientists who are already understanding this field to catalyze and grow it. So 2 terms I use all the time: partnership and collaboration, leverage. Okay? So that's the operationalizing of it. The third is, and probably the most important thing that a CEO does, is hire talent. Recruit the best minds you can, surround yourself with them, and that they will operationalize it. So my job is clarity, hire the people. And what we've been doing in the first 2 years before we went public was building those 2 things: a network of partnerships, collaborators, and the second was bring in the talent. Attracted them, and today, and I'm very proud of this, of my organization, 50% of my organization today are women, 50% are Saudi, and 3 of my direct reports directly into the CEO are women. 2 of the 4 verticals that we run are run by women. By 4 verticals, I mean our research grant program, our investment program, our medical and translational program, and our future research institute. 2 out of the 4 are women. So we are living the concept for the benefit of all, by starting with ourselves. Representative globally, representative diversity by age and gender and origin. And you cannot espouse to be, quote, global without starting and looking at yourself. So that to me is operational. I hope that answers your question.
And sticking with the operations a little bit, I mean, you're based in Riyadh, but you have expanded using Boston as your base for North America operations. Can you tell us about that choice as Boston for the United States?
Yeah, so as we conceived the global footprint of the organization, one of the things that if you really want to enable collaboration, you have to have a presence in the right sort of milieu and ecosystem where the conversation's happening, right? Progress happens in many fields, especially science, not just because of formal communication, but that informal exchange of ideas, the concept of the water cooler discussion. And so we looked globally and said, where is the action today? Let's talk about what the action is going to be in the future, but where's the action today? And it's clear about in the aging field in general and biotechnology included, about 60% of the global action is actually in North America, US and Canada. Historically, that's been the case. And two centers of gravity. One is the Northeast, and the other is the Bay Area and San Diego. Boston was a no-brainer simply because within a very close proximity of Boston, you have New York, of course, MIT, Harvard, all the biotech companies, the venture capital funds, all of that ecosystem, not just the science, but the whole ecosystem is right there. But it touches the entire, from DC up to Boston, this great corridor of big pharma, biotech, and finance. If we're going to start somewhere, we start there. Would we in the future end up with a West Coast presence as well? We're absolutely considering it. Similarly, we're looking now in the Europe, UK ecosystem. Where is the center of gravity there, where we should be present? And in that, have presence. And in the future, as things grow, because this is going to take, going to take a village, right? It's going to take global ideas. So where should we be engaging in Asia? Where are the other locations where there is an opportunity to attract talent and investment into this field? May not be the case today, but it's going to happen, right? So Boston was the start. We're operational there already. It was very much part of our strategy, and the next steps will evolve from here.
It's fascinating because the idea of evolution has got to be, and it's fascinating to hear you talk about when you talk about partnership and leverage and democratization. It's extraordinarily aspirational as far very humanistic, you know, it's the global in scope, but there is a community in place. How has this community received and reacted to evolution?
Well, I'm a scientist, so I believe in data and numbers. So let me start with that. The proof points is, you know, there's always the initial question. An organization is like this has never existed. While there are plenty of nonprofits in different fields, not in this aging of our scale, but to put under one umbrella a science funding organization and venture capital of size, and now soon to come, you know, the translational stuff. Will people work with us and engage with us, given the time zone differences, cultural differences? The response has been amazingly positive, and it actually validates that the gap existed. You know, it's not like we're trying to push anything uphill. The traction has been immediate because the demand was there. And what's the proof points? Well, for every grant we've funded so far, our applications number about 10 to 1. So if we look at our last round of research grants that we've just announced in geroscience for North America and Europe, we received almost 500 letters of intent from scientists around the world, mostly from North America and Europe. We have capacity in each round to fund maybe 50 of those. So it's not that the other 451, but that we'll have to say, sorry, can't fund you all, but great ideas, we'll go to the next stage. When we announced for a research program for new scientists, because Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has great scientists, but they haven't been focused on geroscience and aging. So we want to change that in every region we go. So we announced a funding program for Saudi scientists to apply out of this pool. We got 120 applications as letters. Of those, we announced 11 grant recipients. So it was no different than the experience we had everywhere. That tells me, Richard, that the demand is there. In addition to what the wonderful work NIH is doing, or the Medical Research Council is doing in the UK, the European Union is doing, but their focus on aging in proportion to everything else is very small. We're rapidly changing that. And so Impetus Grants, which is another partner of ours where we administer grants, half of their grant program is now funded through Hevolution's grants to them, right? American Federation of Aging Research, almost half of their grant program is funded by Hevolution. So that tells you the demand has been there, and we've had amazing traction. Great announcements to come, by the way. In about 21 days is what my team reminds me regularly. In about 21 days, we're going to be announcing some great initiatives and partnerships of an even higher magnitude and scale.
Great segue. Great segue.
That was a natural segue right there.
Wow, wow, you are an expert at this. Let's talk about this. Is a Global Healthspan Summit that is coming at the end of this month, November 29th, 30th in Riyadh. A big, as you say, sort of a coming out party. How does this fit into the Hevolution Foundation mission, its objectives, and tell us all about it, because this is so exciting.
So, we talked about operationalizing, right? If we think about what operationalizing means in terms of activity, I talked about the partnership strategy, which is sort of the enabler. Now I'll put a different aspect of a CEO, which is, what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to convene the best minds. We're trying to catalyze the research and the commercialization. And through that, we're trying to bring in new talent and new players that may not traditionally have talked to each other. Okay, so you think about this. Well, what I just described in terms of the research funding, and now as we go through to investments, we can talk about that. That's all part of the catalyzing, right? We're providing the resource to catalyze this. But a key part of catalyzing is to convene. And so to me, the most effective way is to bring the best minds together. This has traditionally been a relatively small field when it comes to science and investments compared to, let's say, cancer or heart disease or diabetes, my specialty. The largest meeting that gathers is typically a science meeting or investment meeting or a policy meeting, and where each of these have their own meeting, but they don't talk to each other. And even then, you might bring 50, 100, 150 people together. Our goal is to convene scientists, investors from venture capital, institutionals, large pharma, biotech, including startups, policymakers, ethicists, which hardly ever enters this discussion, at one meeting. And over 2 days, have some structured conversations, some breakouts, but a lot of informal, so that these people hear a discussion and say, I want to talk to this investor, I want to talk to this scientist, and start the process through that convening, catalyzing the conversation. New ideas likely to come out of those. And in the process, to sort of excite people, we're going to set examples of partnerships that we've already established, haven't announced them, negotiated, contracts have been signed, and there's a big 800-pound gorilla one, including all of that, which I'll just leave it as a teaser to be announced, so that people say that this field is real, it's here, it's now grown up, and we want to hold it right here close to our headquarters in Riyadh. We like to think of this as our role is in the Middle East. We're bringing the East and the West, North and the South, all together in Riyadh to really get, because this is one thing that affects every human being on the planet.
It's fascinating in so many ways. And by the way, I don't think we should say congratulations and commend you. This is an extraordinary initiative, really extraordinary. And it's striking because you were talking about the Global Healthspan Summit. Saudi Arabia has actively moved into areas where the convening they've become a leading convener, and they've done it in areas. So, for example, the FII is really it's similar to the World Economic Forum, Davos. So it's an iteration. It's a different iteration. It's become very successful. The World Defense Show. We have things like Farnborough and the Abu Dhabi Air Show, Defense Show. There's nothing like this. I mean, this Global Healthspan Summit is the first of its kind, correct?
Absolutely. There is no meeting that's focused on healthy aging that brings all these stakeholders together. And some, frankly, are stakeholders that are relevant and critical, but haven't thought about this. So when we put together our advisory panel on the bioethics of healthy aging, there had never been a convening of that. So I'm delighted that a longstanding friend and colleague, Professor Arthur Kaplan at NYU, accepted the role of chairing that and bringing together world experts. We have Professor Julian from Oxford University bringing a UK-European perspective on the bioethics. We have bioethicists from the Middle East giving a Middle Eastern perspective. So, it's a multicultural, multinational bioethics perspective on this. Never happened before. So that's just one example. Scientists that we're inviting to the table that otherwise would not have come together. I've got economists coming from London Business School to talk to biologists on the interface between the economics of doing this, the ethics of doing this, and the biological pathways of doing this in front of policymakers who are looking at what are the regulatory changes we have to make if we're going to address this issue. That's never happened before.
It's an extraordinary systemic approach. I'm chuckling a little bit. A classmate of mine from undergrad is a bioethicist up at the University of Minnesota, and it's kind of a very specific, and you might even say arcane field. But of course, it impacts so broadly, and it really is fascinating that you're bringing every part of the picture into one place at one time.
So, Richard, can I just, by the way, I'm glad you said University of Minnesota because that's my alma mater, but that's absolutely, I'm a Gopher and a Vikings fan. So, but that's, I'm an eternal optimist. That's why
I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry about Kirk. Yeah. I'm sorry about Kirk Cousins and also Justin Jefferson.
But look, we might have found our future quarterback.
Yes, you have. It's true.
So, look, think of it this way. The whole idea of bioethics resonates with our vision, right? We said from the day one, this is for the benefit of all. And so what I was concerned about is having an independent assessment. Are we always keeping that in mind, and how? That was important. But the second is this field, we have to be very thoughtful of not only scientifically what is technically possible, but what is ethically appropriate. Those aren't the same thing. So, for example, there have been initiatives where, and I'm only going to use this as an easy ethical example, taking blood from a young person and giving it to an old person to rejuvenate their body is not ethically scalable. The socioeconomic background, typically of the donor, is not the same as the recipient. And that we have to ask ourselves. And now, I don't need an ethicist to tell me that's not the right approach. It's not scalable. But if I use that example, but what if we could find the circulating factor in a young person's blood, which allows rejuvenation of an older person? Then we could take that factor, figure out how to manufacture it in a manufacturing plant without, of course, using humans, and now give it. And that's how human insulin is given to every patient that needs insulin and diabetes in the world. They're not getting insulin from a human, but they're getting human insulin. The same way, the science might make sense, but the way to ethically do it is not to create plasma transfusion clinics, as some have proposed. And I think the ethics of this is very, very critical in that discussion. That's why we started with that.
So it's exciting because you're operationally running this new organization that's getting set up now. It's going to have its big coming out party in a few weeks. And then the other side of it is the investment side, the writing of grants. You noted in an interview in the Wall Street Journal that in this general field, which is new, there's a lot of snake oil. There's a lot of claims that are being made. Is there anything that really excites you right now that you can share with us? Any focus? Is it more on food and diet? Is there anything that is really exciting to you right now, or that keeps you up at night because it has enormous potential?
We are thinking from a public health perspective as well. In fact, one of the announcements we're looking to make, or we will be making in 3 weeks, is the start of an initiative from thinking about this from a school of public health perspective. So I want to just get out, that's one of our early initiatives. What is it about public health that can enable healthy aging? There's a lot already known. One of the challenges with public health approaches in healthy aging is not that we don't know what to do, it's how to actually implement it in real society. That's going to take a lot different understanding of data and AI and all of the, because if you ask any, I always give this example when I teach. If knowledge was the only barrier to implementation, there would not be a single doctor who smokes. But the reality of it is, they still are some doctors who smoke, which has nothing to do with them not knowing about it. That is the difference between knowledge versus actually compliance and implementation. The gap in public health is not we don't know what to do, we just don't know how to implement it and get populations to comply. How should we think about that? So that's one bucket. We will be making some announcements around that. Separate to that is as we think about exciting new areas. And by the way, in that public health, is it going to need technology? Are there sensors, wearables, devices, things that could change us as humans living in real lives? We're not lab rats sitting in a cage being told how to be, what to eat and how to act. We are in free living societies. How do we do that? Can we use technology there? So that's a whole exciting area. Another is the fact that we thought about medical interaction is very episodic. So I'm ill, I go to the doctor, gives me a prescription, take it for a week, and many of us don't even finish a week of prescription. We're done, we feel better despite the instructions. We go away. But health maintenance is ongoing real-time interaction. But you can't call your doctor or your nurse every day. But is there an alternative? How do we get that? Where do we go from here? Things are changing, right? In our own lifetimes, we have technologies that can change that. That's exciting. The second part is we know that biology has a profound ability to rejuvenate itself. And the example I like to give is, if I measure the biological age of your cells, let's assume you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s, I can actually demonstrate your cells are of that age. And yet, from your own cells, from a mother and a father, their two respective cells, you create a baby. And at the time of conception, that baby's cells have an age of 0. Right? Just think how profound that is. You have sperms and eggs come together, both respectively reflect the biological age of the parent. They come together, fertilize, the DNA coming together. At that point, the clock starts again. There's a Control-Alt-Delete, and you start again, and the clock is reset. We've never asked ourselves, well, why or how? Because otherwise, if it didn't reset, every generation would be getting biologically older. So there's no question it resets. We just don't know how. So as we think about those pathways, it isn't that we're changing nature. Let me be clear. Nature already does this at every generation. Think about your cells dividing. The cells that are dividing don't reset the clock. And yet your children had a reset clock. What is the difference? What are the mechanisms? Could we do that to reset the rejuvenation of your kidney cells if you were getting accelerated aging in your kidneys or in your heart or in your eyes? And the evidence is that we can actually do that. For example, there have been publications on the cover page of Nature that have shown that blind animals whose retinal cells that aged could re-see again. That's not Star Trek. That's been shown. That's exciting. So there are these pieces of evidence that suggest that biologically things can be done. And by the way, we can't grow an eye and reconnect it to your brain. It has to be done in vivo. The exciting challenge in this is if you ever think about flying a plane, you're rewiring this plane and flying it at the same time. We're living our lives and rewiring our bodies in real time. The body does that. It just forgets how to rewire it to the way it was 20 years ago. I hope that gives you, there's a lot of exciting opportunity here.
You know, Dr. Khan, I can see why when they brought the team in to brainstorm about Hevolution and they asked you to consult, I can absolutely see why they asked you to be the CEO.
This is the guy.
You know, in terms of wrapping up all the things you need in leadership for an initiative like this, it's just fascinating. This is just fascinating, and your enthusiasm and expertise just shines through. This has really been fun.
Dr. Mehmood Khan, Chief Executive Officer at the Hevolution Foundation, the first of its kind global nonprofit organization that provides grants and early stage investments to incentivize independent research and entrepreneurship in the emerging field of healthspan science. Dr. Khan, what an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
The honor is mine and the privilege of helping make a difference across the world and leading an amazing team that is already global in something that can touch everybody's lives. And to me, to be able to do that late in one's career is a culmination of all of the things one learns over a 40-year career to be able to put them to practice. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks in helping us get the word out of what we are doing and why it's important.